And we get to start out. Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
And thank you for joining. We are. I didn't write down where we were last time.
Page 24, the last one, about 2/3 down, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi.
Yeah. No, I have it on. I wrote it in the book, but I often try to do the same in Sfaria for folks who are watching online, which I didn't do, but I will do right now. All right, Sfaria, Talmud, Brachot. You can see I was checking something earlier in the week. It's right at the end of 4b, so I'll go to 5a. Yeah. So if you're looking online, it is for very end of 4b, which is they number the paragraphs number 27. I will stop sharing and put the link in the chat if anyone wants it. It's so 4b paragraph 27 right at the very bottom there. And we're about to get in some comparatively goofy stuff pretty soon. Also a link to this week's Parsha for those of you who are fans of it. But before we start, we'll do the bracha for Torah study, which is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And this actually, I'm going to dive right in because oddly enough, it's on topic. Meaning it's on the topic that you would expect in the section where we I supposed to be talking about the Shema, but end up on all of these tangents here and there. And last time we were talking about how many times the angel Gabriel takes to fly to a place as opposed to the angel Michael. Oh, that's exciting. The text from the high school that for the first time this week there'll be in-person school tomorrow. Eitan, as a quick aside, Eitan's been home now for 2 weeks and literally is walking around the house saying, "Is it over? Is it over? Is it over? Is it over?" It's not. It's not the greatest moment. I feel like walking around the house saying, "Is it over? Is it over? Is it over? Is it over?" But I keep it in. We've gone on all these tangents, including last time, like sort of this angelology of like sort of like a ranking of angels and how long it takes them to go here or there, and there was this sort of there's the tangent into Ashrei and why you have to say Ashrei 3 times a day. And again, like that was the extent of it. Like the little thing that we did last week is the extent of what the Talmud, like sort of like it's the principle that like that makes Ashrei appear 3 times in the Siddur. Now we're back to the Shema. So this is, I'm in the book in the Koren Steinsaltz, it's a little more than halfway down on page 24. Again, 4b paragraph 27 if you're looking online in the Sfaria. And it begins. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, he says, Af al pi shekara adam kriyat shema b'veit hakneset mitzvah likrot al hamita. He says, even though a person said kriyat shema, the reading of the Shema in shul, Beit Knesset, right? You did it during Ma'ariv. Mitzvah likroto al mitato. It's still a mitzvah to say it on your bed. I was asked not long ago. It's important to say it in bed, and here is part of the source of it, where it says that it's even if I said it once in the evening as part of Ma'ariv, I'm still supposed to say it as I sit down to go to sleep. So obviously Ma'ariv, it's paired with the Amidah. And at bedtime. It's not. My Rabbi Yossi, Mikra. Well, actually, before we get there, why would you say it on your bedside? And it just seems to be, this is finally them getting around to the literal sense of B'shof B'cha, when you lie down. So when I lie down, say the Shema. Now, oddly enough, of course, there's a Shema of bedtime and not a Shema of morning time. You don't say it. The first thing you say when you wake up is, Bodeh Ani. But there's a Shema of bedtime. If you look in a Siddur, any traditional Siddur will have the Shema of bedtime in it. If you look in, I would think Lev Shalom has it, but I'm not sure. I know it's in Sim Shalom, either the weekday or the full. It's in there. It's in an art scroll. If you look at the table of contents, it'll give you the Shema of bedtime. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Maikra. What's the verse for this? Is there a verse in the Torah that tells us specifically why it's important to say the Shema also when you lie down, meaning like on your bed, just in case, even though I already said it early in the evening. And the verse he gives isn't the one you'd expect, which would be from the Shema. He gives a verse from Psalm number 4, and the verse is Rigzu al tachru amru lavchem al mishkavchem demosela. What's the verse that he says? Tremble and do not sin. Say to your heart upon your bed and be still. Selah. So, because it seems to be a link, say belavavchem in your heart, on your bed, is, we'll say the words that you're supposed to put on your heart when you're sitting on your bed. So it's sort of a creative read of this, of the verse from Psalms. But we're going to stay there in a moment. So, Amar Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman says, now we're on page 5a, still bottom of page 24, and if you're looking in the book, but it's top of 5a if you're looking online. Im Talmud Chachamhu Ein Zarich says, but if you're a Torah scholar, you don't need to say it. Right? So, Rabbi Shua ben Levi says, say the Shema every night when on the bedside. Rabbi Nachman says, yeah, the people need to do that. But if you're a Torah scholar, you don't really need to. And you see in Lightface there in the English translation, they add something. I just want to point out that in the actual Talmud text, it just says, Ein Zarich. You don't need to. The English adds in, and this is very sort of Rashi. I didn't check. They might be getting this from Rashi, sort of filling in the blank. Why don't you need to? Talmud doesn't ask why don't you need to, so leaves it to us figure it out. Well, if you're a Torah scholar, then you're probably always engaged in the study of Torah and will likely fall asleep engrossed in matters of Torah. You can all imagine this about me if you wish, if you want to. But notice here, they're doing a carve out, right? Yeah, and Rabbi Nachman actually is doing a carve out for Torah scholars. Is it because he assumes that they're studying anyway and are going to pass out from exhaustion while studying Torah? Maybe, or maybe he thinks that you just have so many mitzvot that you don't need it. It's not quite clear what he's saying. It could actually be that. I'm reading a biography of Churchill right now, so I actually fall asleep. I read it till I'm too exhausted to think anymore, so that I don't have to deal with the rest of the world. So I actually fall asleep, not to Torah, but to Winston, who just made a bad decision to invade the Gallipoli Peninsula in World War I. Anyway, so he says you don't need to read it if you're a Torah scholar. That's for everybody else. Now we got to disagree. Lamar Baya, Av Talmid Chacham, Yivayle Lememar, Had Psuka Derachme, Kagon, Biadcha, Afkid Ruchi, Petita, Oti, Adonai Elmet. And Abaye says, even a Torah scholar should recite at least one verse, the Rachme, one verse of mercy, imploring God's mercy on the bedside. So, okay, you don't need to literally say the Shema. Maybe you're exempt from that because you sort of have piled up enough credits or whatever it is. But you should say like one thing that's like very specifically asking God's mercy before you go to sleep, and that seems to be part of it. That, well, again, like when you're asleep, you're vulnerable, right? Like you're not just vulnerable to bad things happening to you in this world. They certainly imagine that, like when you're asleep, you're vulnerable to negative forces out there in the world, and so you need extra protection when you're asleep. And this isn't just ADT monitoring your house. Like you need the spiritual version of that. That seems to be part of saying the Shema at night. And Abai is like, you still need some level of protection, asking for God's mercy to protect you when you're vulnerable, when you're sleeping, because again, who knows if you're going to wake up. And so he suggests a verse, and he suggests a verse from Psalm 31, which is, in your hand I trust my spirit, you have redeemed me, Lord God of truth. And I will say, as a rabbi, what's striking about this line is that this is part of the deathbed Shema. When there's sort of a handful of verses that we traditionally say when we think that death may be near, the Shema being one of them, and this line from the Psalms being one of them. And it's not, I mean, so I've found myself saying it frequently, and like I can't see it here without associating it with that. So it should be a long time before you hear it in that context, Ad Me'av Esrim. But that line, in your hand I entrust my spirit. You have redeemed me, Adonai, God of truth. Is Deathbed Shema, and obviously the author of Don Olam, I think was Ibn Gabriel, was familiar with this line, right? You recognize the line Afkid Ruchi, also appears in Don Olam. The poet is sampling again, most frequently hip hop and rap artists sample earlier songs and drop them into their current songs. So you have old 70s songs sampled in new songs or whatever, like the liturgical poets did that as well. So like the author of Adon Olam sampled this verse from Psalms. Continuing on, top of page 25 here. This is where we're gonna get a couple of odd paragraphs here, or of sort of engaging paragraphs, at least to me engaging. I'll pause. Questions on that stuff, because we're pivoting.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
Rabbi. You were making a point that that last line, if Torah scholar were to say one line, isn't the flip side of that said in the morning as well? That a blessing for thank you for returning my spirit to me.
Yes.
So this is the flip side of that.
Yes, exactly. That it's the excellent point. Good pickup. That's the you see the theology playing itself out. That there's that at night, I'm losing control. Right when I'm asleep, I'm not in control anymore. This is we're sort of not in control of our minds. Like we can wake up and say I had the strangest dream. Sometimes we're not in control of our bodies, right? Your hands, your like to varying extent, we're not in control of ourselves. So there's a sense that your soul may or may not be present. And then like in the morning, thank you for giving it back to me. And giving it back, restoring it to me, like obviously implies that that it might not have been there all along. So it's yes. So good pickup. That great line that we say each morning. Frequently, Rabbi Sisi will sing it with us, like the Elohai Neshama Shana Tata Bi Torahi, that the God that you place within me is pure. Like that, it's restored to you in that bracha. Yep, exactly. That's part of like sort of like living having a sense of gratitude each day is partly born out of that. Now the earlier line that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi or that Rabbi Yossi said about tremble and do not sin, say to your heart upon your bed and be still, Selah. That also they're going to because somebody mentioned that verse, they're going to riff on that verse for a moment, just because again somebody mentioned and brought and the links to this. Amar Rabbi Levi bar Hama, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, also known as Resh Lakish, he says, Le'olam Yerazu Adam Yetzer Tov al Yetzer Ra, Shenamar Ragzu al Techatav. Rabbi Levi ben Hama said that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, one should always, they translate, incite his good inclination as Yetzer Tov against his evil inclination, Yetzer Ra, meaning because it says, tremble and do not sin. And that do not sin, for some reason, I don't quite get like why that line prompts him to this. Like what he's saying is, you're in a constant battle between your Yetzer Tov and your Yetzer Ra, your good inclination and bad inclination. They're supposed to always be fighting with each other, and that seems to be the trembling. That trembling is that struggle. So he says your good inclination and bad inclination are always going to be fighting it out with each other, and you should be sort of like trying to rouse your good inclination to be fighting against your bad inclination. You've got them both. And if you win, if you subdue your evil inclination, mutav, great. Im lav, and if not, asok b'torah. Shenetma, imru b'lavchem. And if you don't, and if you don't win, then you should like busy yourself with Torah. You should study some Torah because it says, "Amru b'lavchem." Say it in your hearts. And the next part of that same thing, that you should tremble and don't sin, and say in your hearts. So and say it in your hearts. Obviously, the thing that you say in your heart is the Shema, right? Like sort of like Torah, like the Torah is supposed to be in your heart. Like so, so if you don't succeed in having your good inclination subdue your bad inclination, go do some Torah study. Maybe that will help you triumph. Im nitzchu mutav, and if it does subdue it, mutav, great. Im lav yikra kriyat shema, and if not, do the kriyat shema. It says we say the Shema, right? Again, so if your good inclination isn't subduing your bad inclination, this is sort of he's like going down the list of things that are supposed to help you subdue your evil inclination. So if Torah study didn't work, say the Shema. Shenetmar al mishkavchem, because it says the next two words of that line in the Psalms is on your bed. What do you do on your bed? You say the Shema. Im nitzchu mutav, and if you then subdue your evil inclination, mutav, great. And if not, yiskor lo yom hamita shenamar v'demusa. And if it doesn't work, then remember the day of your death, because the next line is, and be still, Selah. And what is still? Still is death. So
does this establish a hierarchy that puts reciting the Shema as being more having a greater impact on a person than studying Torah? Or does it just focus? And maybe because of the words in the Shema, it's focused on
right
on the words as they say here. Like say to your heart. And
Right. So this is the thing. Like, is it an ascending order of the number one thing you do is study Torah? Is that because it's the most effective, or because it's the least effective, and then you like need and the higher dose of some like is this like going up in dosage, and then like I need that didn't work, so I need a higher dose, which is the Shema. Then I need an even higher dose, which is remembering my mortality. Or is it just that he's following? Is it driven by the verse, and the verse is sort of like dictating the order of things for him, because he's pegging everything to each word in that line of Psalms. So it's not clear if chicken and egg is the order imposed onto the verse, or is the verse dictating the order? Is one more powerful than the other, or is it just that I'm desperate, studying Torah didn't work, so I'm going to say the Shema? But in any event, this is sort of like this is one line of the battle of your good inclination, your bad inclination. If you have a copy of the Koran, you notice it has a little introduction for some of these people. For some of the rabbis, they'll give personalities, and so they give a little profile of Resh Lakish, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, who is most frequently called Resh Lakish, which is just his acronym, Rabbi Shimon Resh Lakish. So I'm going to read that out. Some of you have a copy of the book, some of you don't. But he is one of the more fascinating figures that will pop up because he's got real personality. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, typically referred to as Resh Lakish, was among the greatest Amoraim. Amoraim is the generations of people after the Tanaim. The Tanaim are the people who appear in the Mishnah. They are the highest level, as it were, of rabbis. The ones primarily from the time of the destruction of the temple to about the year 200. Those are the Tanaim. They're the ones who appear in the Mishnah. After the Mishnah are the Amoraim. They're sort of next in line of prominence. So he's in this next generation, won't be found in the Mishnah, but will be in the Talmud. We continue on. He lived in Eretz Yisrael, is a friend and brother-in-law of Rabbi Yochanan. Great stories about that. Right? Resh Lakish's story is amazing. He studied Torah from a young age, but perhaps due to dire financial state, sold himself to a Roman circus as a gladiator. There are many stories in the Talmud that attest to his great strength. Sometime later, in the wake of a meeting with Rabbi Yochanan, he resumed his Torah study, first as a student of Rabbi Yochanan, then as a friend and colleague. He married Rabbi Yochanan's sister. That's also a great story. Many halachic disagreements between Resh Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan concerning central issues of halacha are recorded in the Talmud. His objective was not to disagree with Rabbi Yochanan, but rather to help him hone his opinion through debate. Rabbi Yochanan related to him with great respect, often saying, "My peer disagrees with me. He's well known to strict piety, etc., etc." This is if ever you hear stories of disagreements, I often will cite these guys. I feel like I may even have over the last couple of years, even on the high holidays, as our society has grown less and less tolerant of disagreement. Rabbi Yochanan famously, after Resh Lakish's death, Rabbi Yochanan sort of drove his brother-in-law and best friend Resh Lakish to his death, that would sit across from other students who he complained about, that Rabbi Yochanan said that we're studying together and you're telling me 20 reasons why I'm right. I know I'm right. I say these things because I'm right. Resh Lakish, on the other hand, would give me 20 reasons why I'm wrong, and my having to respond to him made me hone myself ever sharper. I don't want you to tell me why I'm right. I want you to tell me why I'm wrong. That's Resh Lakish, who was always disagreeing with his peers.
Didn't we just read about Rabbi Resh Lakish in this previous course, the one written by the woman, Bible scholar?
Yes. Yeah. He definitely would have popped up in our earlier studies when we did like a bride for one night. He definitely would have appeared there. I think in that context, in the marrying Rabbi Yochanan's sister context, it is. I'm not a fan of. Sometimes it feels political. There's of hunting for. Apropos of our discussions earlier this week, sometimes I think people hunt for gay moments in the Jewish tradition, specifically with King David, which I really don't see. But with Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish, there's a real homoerotic charge to their interactions. I'm not one of those people who sort of see it everywhere. You know, there's sort of different people who see sort of gay references everywhere. Some people see anti-Semitism everywhere, whatever it might be. I tend not to, but it feels present in their relationship. To the point where when they meet, Rabbi Resh Lakish says to Rabbi Yochanan, "Wow, you are a good-looking guy." And he says, "Well, you should see my sister. Why don't you marry my sister, right? She looks like me." And it's sort of that transfer of, you're really good-looking. Well, you should then marry my sister because she looks like me. There's a clear charge there. Anyway, moving along. This is relevant to this week's parsha and also a fascinating piece. The next paragraph. This is being cited because of the same transmission, right? The previous one we cited because somebody mentioned that line, "Tremble and do not sin," etc. And it brought us a teaching that Rabbi Levi Bar Chama said in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, in the name of Resh Lakish. So this is another thing that Rabbi Levi Bar Chama said that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, and that is, "My dichtiv lecha et luchot ha'even v'atorah v'mitzvah asher katavti v'aratam." That it's a quote actually from next week's parsha, but it's relevant to this one. God says to Moses, "Ascend on the mountain and be there, and I will give you the stone tablets and the Torah and the mitzvah, and I have written that you may teach them," which is sort of an oddly constructed sentence, right? So that's after, if this week we read the Ten Commandments, that's Exodus 20. This is Exodus 24. So then after the Ten Commandments, we get all the law, sort of the rapid fire laws of Parshat Mishpatim. And at the end of that, God says, "Ascend to me on the mountain and be there, and I will give you the stone tablets and the Torah and the mitzvah, and I have written that you may teach them," which doesn't scan quite right. So what do they think that this means? Luchot, the tablets. Elu, Aseret Dibrot. Those are the 10 Commandments, right? What are on the Luchot? What are on the tablets? The 10 Commandments. But the verse says, Luchot ha'even v'haTorah. It says the stone tablets and the Torah. Torah, Zemikra. That's the Torah. That's the 5 books of Moses, right? That's the Pentateuch, right? So Moses goes up the mountain, and God says, "I'm going to give you the Luchot, 10 Commandments, and the Torah," meaning all of the Torah. V'ha mitzvah. He says, and the mitzvah. What's the mitzvah? Zo Mishnah. That's the Mishnah. When God says the tablets and the Torah and the mitzvah, what's the mitzvah? That's the Mishnah. Asher katavti, that I've written. What do you mean that I've written? Of course we know that it's written. What does it mean that I've written? Well, that Elu Nevim Ketuvim. Well, we even call them the writings, right? Like the writings are part of the Tanakh. That must be the prophets and the writings. That's what God's giving to Moses. Lahorotam, in order to teach them. Oh, what's the teaching? What's teaching in what's teaching? What's another word of saying it? Talmud. Zet Talmud. Learn that all of them were given to Moses at Mount Sinai. So this weirdly constructed sentence, I'm giving you the stone tablets and the Torah and the mitzvah that I've written, that you may teach them. What does that mean? That means that the 10 Commandments, the Torah, the Mishnah, the rest of the Tanakh, Nevi'im and Ketuvim, and the Talmud, all given to Moses at Mount Sinai. I'll pause here. You may say, wait a minute. They're writing the Talmud.
They got preempted.
Right. So, so presumably they're aware of the timeline that they're putting together the Talmud, as it were, and they're saying also that it was given on Mount Sinai, and this so this is like this you see the theology, right? Like this is that Torah writ large comes from Moses at Mount Sinai, and whether or not it's in the the book that you're familiar with, it's from Moses at Mount Sinai. The 10 Commandments, yes, Mount Sinai. The rest of the Torah, yes, Mount Sinai. The rest of the Tanakh, yes, Mount Sinai. The Mishnah, yes, Mount Sinai. The Talmud, yes, Mount Sinai. All of it.
But if they were given the Torah at Mount Sinai, wouldn't they have read it and leading to such little things as, oh, we're now going to be wandering the desert for 40 years. This might cause a revolt.
Right. So this is right. So given the basic logical fallacies that you could have, right? And like again, kind of saying Moses could have then said, note to self, don't hit rock, right? So assuming that they could have thought of that too. I think the only logical conclusion is that even they mean this stuff in a matter of speaking, meaning when they say it was given to Moses at Mount Sinai, they mean that all of Jewish life, or all of Jewish teachings, or all of our strivings to understand what God wants from us, they all have equal, as it were, important status, and it all comes from God, and our and revelation isn't a one-time event. God didn't speak to us once at the top of Mount Sinai and give us stone tablets, and everything else and all the rest is commentary, right? This seems to be saying we're continually discovering God's revelation, and God is sort of revealing God's will to us all the time, because how else could they be saying that the Talmud that obviously isn't finished when they're speaking is revealed at Mount Sinai? It's a radical statement, but this is that that all of Jewish learning sort of like flows from that moment, as it were, and they're sharing status. So great. This is a great and significant line that and a source of, as plainly as it could be possibly stated, that the rabbinic belief in, as they say, in Torot, in multiple Torahs, that and you can ask yourself, this links in, if you showed up the other day to when we were teaching about different understandings vis-a-vis gays and lesbians and the Torah and things like this, and we introduced it like sort of with these ways that the rabbis would radically reread Torah or read things out of Torah. And you say, well, if God said it, like, aren't you just obligated to do it? This thing that, sometimes you can pick up in the popular culture. God says it, so aren't you just supposed to do it and not question it, and who am I to question it? And they sort of like, well, an eye for an eye doesn't mean an eye for an eye. It really means this other thing. How can they do that? Because it was given to Moses at Mount Sinai. Like our alternate reads, as it were, is given to Moses at Mount Sinai. This is all from the Babylonian Talmud. The Jerusalem Talmud is comparatively rarely studied. The Babylonian Talmud is the influential and authoritative volume, as it were, volumes. So, new topic. This is that's our little digression into this fascinating moment where they say that the Talmud was given to Moses on the top of Mount Sinai, which is often all aspects of Torah given to Moses at Mount Sinai. Kulam. Now you understand why he dropped them, because it's a lot of books. Continuing along, there's the middle of page 25. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak says, "Kol korei kriyat shema mitato keilu ochez charev shel shtei piyot biyado shenetma romot al birazun v'charev piyot biyadam." This is actually quoting Psalm 149, which is in Psukei Zimra, right before Psalm 150 that we sing each morning. The one right before it, they're quoting right here. Rabbi Yitzchak said, anyone who recites Shema on his bed, it's as if he holds a double-edged sword. A double-edged sword, you have to understand, in Hebrew is a good thing. In English, we often say double-edged sword, and in English, it's a phrase meaning something bad. It means that something could boomerang on you, right? If you say, yeah, that's a double-edged sword, it means that it may cut the way you want it to cut, but it also might cut the way you don't want it to cut, right? In Hebrew, it's the opposite. In Hebrew, and you'll see it here, a double-edged sword is a good thing because you can just sort of slice twice as many people with it, as it were, right? So English, double-edged sword means unintended consequences. And in Hebrew, it means double-edged sword is twice as good. And you'll see that in a moment. So he says, anyone who recites Shema on his bed, it's as if he held a double-edged sword. Again, a good thing, guarding him from all evil. As I said, this is from Psalm 149. High praises of God in their mouth and a double-edged sword in their hands. Again, in the Psalm, same thing. Double-edged sword, good thing. You can take out. It's twice as effective. The Talmud asks, from where do we know that line double-edged sword refers to the Shema? My mashma, Marzutra v'itma Ravashi. Marzutra says in something it was Ravashi who said Mireisha de Anina. Dichti v'rezun chasidim v'chvod yirnu al mishkvodam. We learn it from the verse right before it in Psalm 149 that says, let the pious exult in glory, let them joyously sing upon their beds. What does it mean? What does it mean that they're going to sing upon their bed? What do you sing on your bed? The Shema. We just said you sing the Shema on your bed. So saying the Shema is like a double-edged sword. It protects you twice as much. And then right after it says high praises of God in their mouths and a double-edged sword in their hand. So when you say the Shema on your bed, it's like having a double-edged sword in terms of protection, right? Next line. Ma Rabbi Yitzchak kol korei kriyat shema shel mitato mazikin badlin emenu. Anyone who says the Shema on his bed, demons will stay away from him. I can do this quickly, as so frequently we encounter demons in the text. I don't know if you encounter demons in your life. You encounter demons in the text. And so we'll go, and this is also sort of like the demonology tends to be weird, naturally. So demons obviously are a risk at night, like presumably demons have more power in the dark than in the light, and they're more vulnerable in the dark than in the light. So demons, especially, they were worried about at nighttime. So saying the Shema helps helps get rid of them. Shenamar uvnei reshef yigazun uf. Vein uf ela Torah. Shenamar tife necha bo veinenu. En reshef ela mazikin. Shenamar mazei rav v'lachmei reshef v'ketav merari. And do this relatively quickly, even though it's going to be hard to understand. He says, look, this is like the verse says that from Job, says that man is born into trouble and the sparks, Russia, fly, oof, upwards. Says, fly, oof, oof. Flying means Torah, because then he gives a verse from Proverbs saying that he thinks refers to Torah, and the Torah flies. When you set your eyes upon it, it is gone, for riches certainly make themselves like wings, like an eagle that flies to the heavens. And they think that the flying means Torah, that the reference is to Torah. The word sparks mean nothing other than demons, as it says, and it gives a reference, Deuteronomy, to line, wasting of hunger and devouring of sparks and bitter destruction. Destruction, sparks are linked together, so they're all linked together. So I'm going to keep going. Hard to understand. I'm not sure I understand it. But his point is that saying the Shema protects you from demons. Should you be worried about that? Back to Rab Shimon ben Lakish, bottom of page 25. This is where we're going to get into something that's going to dominate the next couple of pages and is going to be very problematic and controversial, though fascinating, which is a bit of theodicy, which is to say, they're going to delve into some of the questions of why do bad things happen to good people. They're not going to be humble like Rabbi Kushner famously was when he talks about when bad things happen to good people, meaning what can their response be. They're going to do real theodicy, which is they're going to ask why. Spoiler alert, you're unlikely to be satisfied with their answer. So this is also going to function as a trigger warning for the next couple of weeks. They're going to ask questions of theodicy about why bad things happen to good people. And you're likely not going to like their answers. But we're going to do it anyway. It's part of why I picked this up, is this volume is because they're going to face these questions head on. And maybe like when they talk about demons, you're like, I don't know that I agree with this. You might encounter it the same way there. These are questions that they struggle with as well. Anyway, so Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, we're meeting him again. Resh Lakish says, Kol osek b'Torah yisruin badline menu. The reason we're saying this is that he's quoting the same line from Job that the previous paragraph quoted. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, if one engages in Torah study, suffering stays away from him. It said the sparks fly upward, and the fly means nothing other than Torah, and sparks means nothing other than suffering. So he thinks that sparks don't mean demons, they mean suffering. So he says that if you want to avoid suffering in this world, you know what you have to do? Study Torah. You study Torah, you'll be spared suffering.
Rabbi?
Yep.
You know, the word sparks bothers me a little because I've heard the term before, a spark of Yiddishkeit. You have one spark of Yiddishkeit will lead to, more Yiddish. I've heard that term. So it's like the term sparks I've never heard before in this connotation.
So here, spark, the word they're using for spark is entirely negative, right? So often we use it like, that there's a spark within you and it's a good thing, right? Can't light a fire without a spark, as Reb Bruce once said. Right, so spark is often we cite as a good thing, though here they're using it as a negative. Demons and suffering.
Is it the same word in Hebrew? Would it be the same word in Hebrew if you were speaking Hebrew?
They're using reshef. I don't know off the top of my head what other word one would use. But you're right that normally it has a positive connotation. Here it has a negative connotation. No doubt about it. Oh, I just checked the chat. Eileen asked, relative to the earlier piece, was asked like, were all the Psalms given at Mount Sinai? And to the earlier statement, the answer is yes, everything. They're saying everything, Mount Sinai. Now, again, gives us a timeline problem, but we're not concerned about that. It clearly is talking about something else. That we're to treat it as coming from God, or that we understand it as coming from God. That's why they drive mitzvot from anywhere in the Tanakh or anywhere in the Mishnah. That are all sort of, that if you're like engaged in the Jewish tradition, trying to connect to the divine, then maybe you are. Right there, we're going to keep going. We're getting close to the main theodicy section. Though this next paragraph, this is the top of page 26. They're going to be quoting last week's Torah portion. Rabbi Yochanan says back to Resh Lakish. Remember, we noted that they argued. So Resh Lakish said one thing. Here's Rabbi Yochanan, his brother-in-law and study partner, saying back to him, "Ha'afilu tinukot shel beit Rabbanan yodin oto." Says that even school children know this, just from going to school. Meaning like, this isn't such a grand insight, or you don't need to do those fancy links that you're doing with these obscure verses in the book of Job. Like any kid knows that. Because it's written in the Torah. ויאמר אם שמוע תשמע לקול אדוני אלוהיך וישר בעיניו תעשה והמלצת מצוותיו ושמרת כל חוקיו וכל המלאכה אשר שמתי במצרים לא אשים עליך כי אני אדוני רופאך. Right. This was actually I commented in the sort of YouTube video last week from this is just after the Song of the Sea said, it says in the Torah, and God said that you shall surely hear the voice of Adonai your God and do what is upright in his eyes. What is upright in his eyes you shall do, and you shall listen to his mitzvot and guard his statutes. Any disease I have placed upon Egypt, I will not place upon you, for I am Adonai, your healer. So what does it mean, I am Adonai, your healer? Rabbi Yochanan is saying, that means study Torah, and I'll protect you. Right? Like, what else could it be? It says, listen to his mitzvot and guard his statutes, and I am God, your healer. That means, do mitzvot, study Torah. God will heal you.
Hey,
You don't need this fancy stuff.
Rabbi?
Yep.
What about it when we look at the Machzor, what happens to Rabbi Akiva and all those pious people that became martyrs in the Machzor? They surely they studied Torah and everything, and bad things happened.
Lots of it. And what's more is Akiva, to link to the earlier things, is a Tana, meaning he lives before Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish, meaning that they're living a century or so after, maybe a century after those events. So they're they're not contemporaries, but they're, Jewishly speaking, comparatively fresh in their minds. This is why I'm saying that that you're not going to be happy with any of the attempts at doing theodicy. Theodicy, is our SAT word for explaining why a good God, why if there's a good all-powerful God, there's suffering in this world, right? Like, so they know that. Of course they know Rabbi Akiva was skin flayed from his body, and that entire generation was martyred. They know that, and they also know, from 100 situations less than that, right? That there is, let's assume that in their world, the link between Torah study and good health was roughly as strong as the correlation in our world, which is to say, not necessarily, ain't necessarily so. Like so of course they know that. I don't know what to say to you other than, of course they know that. They experience the world as it is. We can say just as any of the sources in the Torah or in the Psalms, where reward and punishment are promised, and reward and punishment aren't doled out, according to our goodness. They know that, and yet they still are trying to, I feel like it's almost a prayer. They want it not to be so. Because, go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, clearly they must know it. I mean, you could take the Rabbi Akiva example, and then you can add on infants. What have they done? Young children. What sin have they? What have they done? And I think you either have to figure out a way, like they did with the examples you meant. You've got to reread it somehow, like they did with the rape law, where you need the witnesses. So they kind of legislated out of existence. Otherwise, their faith is gone. So you've got nothing if you can't somehow figure out a way to rationalize this, or not rationalize, but explain it in a way that makes some kind of sense.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But just spoil it. They're not going to do it in a way that, like, it's the ultimate question of existence, right? It's the ultimate question of existence, and they're not going to get there. Or for me at least, they don't. For some people, they do. For me, they don't. And I would say what's more is, I think it is exceedingly likely that they experience all of this sort of like different types of suffering more than we do. For all of the suffering that we encounter, and we do, I don't want to minimize any of our suffering. The ancient world had suffering. And we'll see it come up. These people lost, the death was a constant companion, and suffering and painful suffering was a constant companion. So that's part of what makes it all the more fascinating. You can be like me. I live an easy life, like death and suffering was a constant companion, which makes it all the more amazing that they hold on to this.
One more thing I was thinking about in Jewish life, especially, like, even if you look at the Shema, it says, if you don't follow these commandments, we're going to throw you guys off the land. So it's not an individual reward or punishment. It is a group.
Biblically, yes, absolutely. That's so excellent point. Biblically, it is. Biblically, it's as a group, right? Like there's certainly a sense of like, I can sin and you might be the one that's punished for it, right? Or that that's a collective, that the people are getting this or not getting it. Here, it seems individual, And so I'm going to finish this paragraph partly because it underlines that that Rabbi Yochanan is saying that no. He's pulling it down to the level of individual, which is different from what you mentioned, which is accurate. That the Tanakh tends to that you're going to survive or not survive as a group, or be punished or rewarded as a group. So I'm not your healer. Rather, one must interpret the verse. He says that Eila kol she'afshar lo asok b'Torah ve'eno osek. HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevi alav yisroim mechorim ve'ochrin oto. Says anyone who is able to study Torah and doesn't study Torah, then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring upon him hideous afflictions and trouble him, as it says, and he'll bring Shane'amar, he'll bring a negative verse from the Psalms. V'ashiveti mitov ave nechar ein tov el Torah Shane'amar ki lechach tov natati lachem torati al tazavu. He'll bring him terrible afflictions and trouble him, as it says, I was mute with silence. I was silent from good, and my pain was strong. What does that strange line from Psalm 39 mean? I was mute with silence. I was silent from good, and my pain was strong. The word good means Torah, because we know when it says, Ki lechach tov natati bahem, I have given you a good portion, Torati, my Torah. Al tazavu, don't forsake it. We say that when we're putting the Torah back in the ark. It's a line from Mishlei, from Proverbs. So that is, if you have been silent from my Torah, then I will be silent from you. So I won't protect you. In other words, you will suffer if you refrain from studying Torah.
But the interesting thing is, if you read the notes on that paragraph, it almost says it's almost like the basis of Jehovah's Witnesses. The beginning,
How do you mean?
In the beginning, if you say something, you should first examine, don't see a doctor, examine why, what you did wrong. So it's like almost that context. It's like
So right. So they wouldn't say right. They're never going to get as far for all of their issues. They're never going to get as far as saying don't see a doctor. Though obviously, for the 19th century, seeing a doctor was a different proposition.
Okay, but
they'll never say that. Though that is the line that line in the Torah is the source for I think Christian scientists like not seeking healing. God is your healer, and not Joe. That it's supposed to be God and not somebody. Obviously, Jewish culture goes in the opposite direction and has a love affair with medicine. But there are groups that took that God is your healer line literally. We'll end on a high note, which is, I'll just quick zip through this next paragraph also because the topic changes after this next paragraph. Says Amar Rabbi Zera, Vitma and Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa. They say Rabbi Zera says, and some think it's Rabbi Chanina Bar Papa. Bovre shelo kamidat kadosh baruch hu midat basar v'dam. Come and see that the qualities of the Holy One of Blessing aren't like the qualities of flesh and blood. Because people, flesh and blood, people, so people sell things to each other. And if I give you something that was mine, something that's valuable, I sell something that was valuable of mine, I'm sad because I'm getting rid of the thing. I don't have it anymore. I have to sell you jewelry. And you buy, like, the purchaser is happy because purchased something that he wanted. He got the jewelry, whatever it is. And the seller is sad because I wanted the jewelry, but I had to sell it. I don't have it anymore. Aval, Kadosh Baruch Hu, Eino chen. But God, the Holy One of Blessing, is not like this. Natan lahem Torah Yisrael v'samech. God gave the Torah to Israel and was happy. Shene'amar ki lekach tov natati lechem, Torati al tozavu. Because it says, I've given you a good portion. My Torah, do not abandon it. A good portion is understood as a good purchase. God sold the Torah to Israel and rejoices in the sale and praises the object for its new owner. Like, so this is God is happy. God got rid of something valuable, as it were, and is happy with it. Unlike getting rid of something, if you have to sell something you love or give away something you love, so people are sad in that situation. God, totally happy to and sharing something wonderful. And that's how they read that verse. We're going to pause there. This next section, and we'll stay there for a while. My guess would be at least 2 classes will be on suffering and their attempts at explaining the world as it is, which is to say, if God is good and people's suffering seem not indexed to their level of goodness, what's going on? That central question is what's going to be addressed. So again, trigger alert, it's not easy stuff, but they're going to be asking questions on that. So there's an all-powerful God who can control everything, and people's suffering seem to be out of proportion to their merit. What's going on? So that's the next couple of classes. It's heady stuff, not hard to understand, but maybe hard to swallow. All right.
Right. Thank you.